filled, some with turquoise stones and others with beryls. The ivory horns were heaped with purple amethysts, and the horns of brass with chalcedonies and sards. The pillars, which were of cedar, were hung with strings of yellow link stones. In the flat oval shields there were carbuncles, both wine-coloured and coloured like grass, and yet I have told thee but a tithe of what was there. And when the emperor had taken away his hands from before his face, he said to me, This is my house of treasure, and half of that is in it is thine, even as I promised to thee. I will give thee camels and camel drivers, and they shall do thy bidding and take thy share of the treasure to whatever part of the world thou desirest to go. And the thing shall be done tonight. For I would not that the son, who is my father, should see that there is in my city a man whom I cannot slay. But I answered him, The gold that is here is thine, and the silver also is thine, and thine are the precious jewels and the things of price. As for me, I have no need of these, nor shall I take aught from thee but that little ring that thou wearest on the finger of thy hand. And the emperor frowned. But it is but a ring of lead, he cried, nor has it any value. Therefore take thy half of the treasure and go from my city. Nay, I answered, but I will take naught but that leaden ring, for I know what is written within it, and for what purpose. And the emperor trembled and besought me and said, Take all the treasure and go from my city. The half that is mine shall be thine also. And I did a strange thing, but what I did matters not. For in the cave that is but a day's journey from this place have I hidden the rings of riches. It is but a day's journey from this place, and it waits for thy coming. He who has this ring is richer than all the kings in the world. Come therefore and take it, and the world's riches shall be thine. But the young fisherman laughed. Love is better than riches, he said, and the little mermaid loves me. Nay, there is nothing better than riches, said the soul. Love is better, answered the young fisherman, and he plunged into the deep, and the soul went weeping away over the marshes. After the 3rd year was over, the soul came down to the shore of the sea and called to the young fisherman. And he rose out of the deep and said, Why dost thou call me? And the soul answered, Come nearer, that I may speak with thee. For I have seen marvellous things. So he came nearer and couched in the shallow water, and leaned his head upon his hand and listened. And the soul said to him, In a city that I know of, there is an inn that standeth by a river. I sat there with sailors who drank of 2 different coloured wines, and ate bread made of barley, and a little salt fish served on bay leaves with vinegar. And as we sat and made merry, there entered to us an old man bearing a leathern carpet, and a lute that had 2 horns of amber. When he had laid out the carpet on the floor, he struck with a quill on the wire strings of his lute, and a girl whose face was veiled ran in and began to dance before us. Her face was veiled with a veil of gauze, but her feet were naked. Naked were her feet, and they moved over the carpets like little white pigeons. Never have I seen anything so marvellous, and the city in which she dances is but a day's journey from this place. Now when the young fisherman heard the words of his soul, he remembered that the little mermaid had no feet and could not dance. And a great desire came over him, and he said to himself, It is but a day's journey. I can return to my love. And he laughed and stood up in the shallow water and strode towards the shore. And when he had reached the dry shore, he laughed again, and held out his arms to his soul. And his soul gave a great cry of joy and ran to meet him, and entered into him. And the young fisherman saw stretched before him upon the sand that shadow of the body that is the body of the soul. And his soul said to him, Let us not tarry, but get hence at once, for the sea gods are jealous, and have monsters that do their bidding. So they made haste, and all that night they journeyed beneath the moon. And all the next day they journeyed beneath the sun, and on the evening of the day they came to a city. And the young fisherman said to his soul, Is this the city in which she dances of whom thou didst speak to me? And his soul answered him, It is not this city, but another. Nevertheless, let us enter in. So they entered in and passed through the streets, and as they passed through the street of jewellers, the young fisherman saw a fair silver cup set forth in a booth. And his soul said to him, "Take that silver cup and hide it." So he took the cup and hid it in the fold of his tunic, and they went hurriedly out of the city. And after that they had gone a league from the city, the young fisherman frowned and flung the cup away, and said to his soul, "Why didst thou tell me to take this cup and hide it? For it was an evil thing to do." But his soul answered him, "Be at peace, be at peace." On the evening of the second day they came to a city, and the young fisherman said to his soul, "Is this the city in which she dances of whom thou didst speak to me?" And his soul answered him, "It is not this city, but another. Nevertheless, let us enter in." So they entered in and passed through the streets. And as they passed through the street of sellers of sandals, the young fisherman saw a child standing by a jar of water. And his soul said, "Smite that child." So he smote the child till it wept. And when he had done this, they went hurriedly out of the city. And after that they had gone a league from the city, the young fisherman grew wroth, and said to his soul, "Why didst thou tell me to smite the child? For it was an evil thing to do." But his soul answered him, "Be at peace, be at peace." And on the evening of the third day they came to a city, and the young fisherman said to his soul, "Is this the city in which she dances of whom you did speak to me?" And the soul answered him, "It may be that this is the city. Therefore let us enter in." So they entered in and passed through the streets, but nowhere could the young fisherman find the river or the inn that stood by its side. And the people of the city looked curiously at him. And he grew afraid and said to his soul, "Let us go hence, for she who dances with white feet is not here." But his soul answered, "Nay, but let us tarry, for the night is dark, and there will be robbers on the way." So he sat him down in the marketplace and rested. And after a time there went by a hooded merchant, who had a cloak of cloth of Tartary, and bare a lantern of pierced horn at the end of a jointed reed. And the merchant said to him, "Why dost thou sit in the marketplace, seeing that the booths are closed, and the bales corded?" And the young fisherman answered him, "I can find no inn in this city, nor have I any kinsman who might give me shelter." "Are we not all kinsmen?" said the merchant, "and did not one God make us? Therefore come with me, for I have a guest chamber." So the young fisherman rose up and followed the merchant to his house. And when he had passed through a garden of pomegranates and entered into the house, the merchant brought him rose water in a copper dish that he might wash his hands, and ripe melons that he might quench his thirst, and set a bowl of rice and a piece of roasted kid before him. And after that he had finished, the merchant led him to the guest chamber, and bade him sleep and be at rest. And the young fisherman gave him thanks, and kissed the ring that was on his hand, and flung himself down on the carpets of dyed goat's hair, and when he had covered himself with a covering of black lamb's wool, he fell asleep. And 3 hours before dawn, and while it was still night, his soul waked him and said to him, "Rise up and go to the room of the merchant, even to the room in which he sleepeth, and slay him, and take from him his gold, for we have need of it." And the young fisherman rose up and crept towards the room of the merchant. And over the feet of the merchant there was lying a curved sword, and the tray by the side of the merchant held 9 purses of gold. And he reached out his hand and touched the sword. And when he touched it, the merchant started and awoke, and leapt up, seizing himself by the sword, and cried to the young fisherman, "Dost thou return evil for good, and pay with the shedding of blood for the kindness that I have shown thee?" And his soul said to the young fisherman, "Strike him." And he struck him so that he swooned, and he seized then the 9 purses of gold, and fled hastily through the garden of pomegranates, and set his face to the star that is the star of the morning. And when they had gone a league from the city, the young fisherman beat his breast and said to his soul, "Why didst thou bid me slay the merchant and take his gold? Surely thou art evil." But his soul answered him, "Be at peace, be at peace." "Nay," cried the young fisherman, "I may not be at peace, for all that thou hast made me to do I hate. Thee also I hate, and I bid thee tell me wherefore thou hast wrought with me in this wise. And his soul answered him, When thou didst send me forth into the world, thou gavest me no heart. So I learnt to do all these things and love them. What sayest thou? Murmured the young fisherman. Thou knowest, answered his soul, thou knowest it well. Hast thou forgotten that thou gavest me no heart? I trow not. And so trouble not thyself nor me, but be at peace. For there is no pain that thou shalt not give away, nor any pleasure that thou shalt not receive. And when the young fisherman heard these words, he trembled and said to his soul, Nay, but thou art evil, and hast made me forget my love, and hast tempted me with temptations, and hast set my feet in the ways of sin. And his soul answered him, Thou hast not forgotten that when thou didst send me forth into the world, thou gavest me no heart. Come, let us go to another city and make merry, for we have 9 purses of gold. But the young fisherman took the 9 purses of gold and flung them down and trampled on them. Nay, he cried, I will have naught to do with thee, nor will I journey with thee anywhere. But even as I sent thee away before, I will send thee away now, for thou hast wrought me no good. And he turned his back to the moon, and with the little knife that had the handle of green viper's skin, he strove to cut from his feet that shadow of the body which is the body of the soul. Yet the soul stirred not from him, nor paid heed to his command, but said to him, The spell that the witch told thee avails thee no more, for I may not leave thee, nor mayest thou drive me forth. Once in his life may a man send his soul away, but he who receiveth back his soul must keep it with him for ever, and this is his punishment and his reward. And the young fisherman grew pale and clenched his hands and cried, She was a false witch, in that she told me not that. Nay, answered his soul, but she was true to him she worships, and whose servant she will be ever. And when the young fisherman knew that he could no longer get rid of his soul, and that it was an evil soul and would abide with him always, he fell upon the ground weeping bitterly. And when it was day, the young fisherman rose up and said to his soul, I will bind my hands that I may not do thy bidding, and close my lips that I may not speak thy words. And I will return to the place where she whom I love has her dwelling. Even to the sea will I return, and to the little bay where she is wont to sing, and I will call to her, and tell her the evil that I have done, and the evil that thou hast wrought on me. And his soul tempted him, and said, Who is thy love, that thou should return to her? The world has many fairer than she is. There are the dancing girls of Samaris, who dance in the manner of all kinds of birds and beasts. Their feet are painted with henna, and in their hands they have little copper bells. They laugh while they dance, and their laughter is as clear as the laughter of water. Come with me, and I will show them to thee. For what is this trouble of thine about the things of sin? Is that which is pleasant to eat not made for the eater? Is there poison in that which is sweet to drink? Trouble not thyself, but come with me to another city. There is a little city hard by, in which there is a garden of tulip trees, and there dwell in this comely garden white peacocks and peacocks that have blue breasts. Their tails, when they spread them to the sun, are like discs of ivory, and like gilt discs. And when she who feeds them dances for their pleasure, and sometimes she dances on her hands, and at other times she dances on her feet. Her eyes are coloured with stibium, and her nostrils are shaped like the wings of a swallow. From a hook in one of her nostrils hangs a flower that is carved out of pearl. She laughs while she dances, and the silver rings that are about her ankles tinkle like bells of silver. And so trouble not thyself any more, but come with me to this city. But the young fisherman answered not his soul, but closed his lips with the seal of silence, and with a tight cord bound his hands, and journeyed back to the place from which he had come, even to the little bay where his love had been wont to sing. And ever did his soul tempt him by the way, but he made it no answer, nor would he do any of the wickedness that it sought to make him to do. so great was the power of the love that was within him. And when he reached the shore of the sea, he loosed the cord from his hands and took the seal of silence from his lips, and called to the little mermaid. But she came not to his call, though he called her all day long and besought her. And his soul mocked him and said, Surely thou hast little joy out of thy love. Thou art as one who in time of death pours water into a broken vessel. Thou givest away what thou hast, and naught is given to thee in return. It were better for thee to come with me, for I know where the valley of pleasure lies, and what things are wrought there. But the young fisherman answered not his soul, but in a cleft of the rock he built himself a house of wattles, and abode there for the space of a year. And every morning he called to the mermaid, and every noon he called to her again, and every night he spake her name. Yet never did she rise out of the sea to meet him, nor in any place of the sea could he find her, though he sought for her in the caves and in the green water, in the pools of the tide, and in the wells that are at the bottom of the deep. And ever did his soul tempt him with evil, and whisper of terrible things. Yet did it not prevail against him, so great was the power of his love. And after the year was over, the soul thought within himself, I have tempted my master with evil, and his love is stronger than I am. I will tempt him now with good, and it may be that he will come with me. So he spake to the young fisherman and said, I have told thee of the joys of the world, and thou hast turned a deaf ear to me. Suffer me now to tell thee of the world's pain, and it may be that thou wilt hearken. For of a truth pain is the lord of this world, nor is there any one who escapes from its net. There be some who lack raiment, and others who lack bread. There will be widows who sit in purple, and widows who sit in rags. To and fro over the fens go the lepers, and they are cruel to each other. The beggars go up and down on the highways, and their wallets are empty. Through the streets of the cities walks famine and plague, and sits in their gates. Come, let us go forth and mend these things, and make them not to be. Wherefore shouldst thou tarry here calling for thy love, seeing she comes not to thy call? And what is love that thou shouldst set this high store upon it? But the young fisherman answered it naught, so great was the power of his love. And every morning he called to the mermaid, and every noon he called to her again, and every night he spake her name. Yet never did she rise out of the sea to meet him, nor in any place of the sea could he find her, though he sought for her in the rivers of the sea, and in the valleys that are under the waves, in the sea that the night makes purple, and in the sea that the dawn leaves grey. And after the second year was over, the soul said to the young fisherman at night time, as he sat in the wattle house alone, Lo, now I have tempted thee with evil, and I have tempted thee with good, and thy love is stronger than I am. Wherefore I will tempt thee no longer. But I pray thee to suffer me to enter thy heart, that I may be one with thee even as before. Surely thou mayest enter, said the young fisherman, for in the days when with no heart thou didst go through the world, thou must have suffered much. Alas, cried his soul, I can find no place of entrance, so compassed about with love is this heart of thine. Yet I would that I could help thee, said the young fisherman. And as he spake, there came a great cry of mourning from the sea, even the cry that men hear when one of the sea folk is dead. And the young fisherman leapt up and left his wattled house, and ran down to the shore. And the black waves came hurrying to the shore, bearing with them a burden that was whiter than silver. Whiter as the surf it was, and like a flower it was tossed on the waves. And the surf took it from the waves, and the foam took it from the surf, and the shore received it. And lying at his feet, the young fisherman saw the body of the little mermaid. Dead at his feet it was lying. Weeping as one smitten with pain, he flung himself down beside it, and he kissed the cold red of the mouth, and toyed with the wet amber of the hair. He flung himself down beside it on the sand, weeping as one trembling with joy, and in his brown arms he held it to his breast. Cold were the lips, yet he kissed them. Salt was the honey of the hair, yet he tasted it with bitter joy. He kissed the closed eyelids, and the wild spray that lay upon their cups was less salt than his tears. And to the dead thing he made confession. Into the shells of its ears he poured the harsh wine of his tale. He put the little hands round his neck, and with his fingers he touched the red reed of the throat. Bitter, bitter was his joy, and full of strange gladness was his pain. The black sea came nearer, and the white foam moaned like a leper. With white claws of foam the sea grabbled at the shore. From the palace of the Sea King came the cries of mourning again, and far out upon the sea the great Tritons blew hoarsely upon their horns. "Flee away," said his soul, "for ever doth the sea come nigher, and if thou tarriest it will slay thee. Flee away, for I am afraid, seeing that thy heart is closed against me by reason of greatness of thy love. Flee away to a place of safety. Surely thou wilt not send me away without a heart into another world." But the young fisherman listened not to his soul, but called on the little mermaid and said, "Love is better than wisdom, and more precious than riches, and fairer than the feet of the daughters of men. The fires cannot destroy it, nor can the waters quench it. I called on thee at dawn, and thou didst not come to my call. The moon heard thy name, yet hadst thou no heed of me. For evilly had I left thee, and to my own hurt I had wandered away. Yet ever did thy love abide with me, and ever was it strong, nor did aught prevail against it. Though I have looked upon evil and looked upon good, and now thou art dead, surely I will die with thee also." And his soul besought him to depart, but he would not, so great was his love. And the sea came nearer and sought to cover him with its waves. And when he knew that the end was at hand, he kissed with mad lips the cold lips of the mermaid, and the heart that was within him brake. As through the fullness of his love his heart did break. The soul found an entrance and entered in, and was one with him even as before. And the sea covered the young fisherman with its waves. And in the morning the priest went forth to bless the sea, for it had been troubled, and with him went the monks and the musicians, and the candle-bearers, and the swingers of censers, and a great company. And when the priest reached the shore, he saw the young fisherman lying drowned in the surf, and clasped in his arms was the body of the little mermaid. And he drew back, frowning, and having made the sign of the cross, he cried out aloud and said, "I will not bless the sea nor anything that is in it. Accursed be all the sea folk, and accursed be all those who traffic with them. And as for him who for love's sake forsook God, and so lieth here with his leman slain by God's judgment, take up his body and the body of his leman, and bury them in the corner of the field of the fullers, and set no mark above them, no sign of any kind, that none may know the place of their resting. For accursed were they in their lives, and accursed they shall be in their deaths also." And the people did as he commanded them, and in the corner of the field of the fullers, where no sweet herbs grew, they dug a deep pit, and laid the dead things within it. And when the 3rd year was over, and on a day that was a holy day, the priest went up to the chapel, that he might show the people the wounds of the Lord, and speak to them about the wrath of God. And when he had robed himself with his robes, and entered in and bowed himself before the altar, he saw that the altar was covered with strange flowers that had never been seen before. Strange were they to look at, and of curious beauty. And their beauty troubled him, and their odour was sweet in his nostrils, and he felt glad, and understood not why he felt glad. And after that he had opened the tabernacle, and incensed the monstrance that was in it, and shown the fair wafer to the people, and hid it again behind the veil of veils, he began to speak to the people, desiring to speak to them about the wrath of God. But the beauty of the white flowers troubled him, and their odour was sweet to his nostrils. And there came another word into his lips, and he spake not of the wrath of God, but the God whose name is love. And why he so spake he knew not. And when he finished his word, the people wept. and the priest went back to his sacristy, and his eyes were full of tears, and the deacons came in and began to unrobe him, and took from him the alb and the girdle, and the maniple and the stool. And he stood as one in a dream. And after they had unrobed him, he looked at them and said, What are the flowers that stand on the altar, and whence did they come? And they answered him, What flowers they are we cannot tell, but they come from the corner of the fuller's field. And the priest trembled, and returned to his own house and prayed. And in the morning, while it was still dawn, he went forth with the monks and the musicians and the candle-bearers and the swingers of censers and a great company, and came to the shore of the sea, and blessed the sea, and all the wild things that are in it. The fawns also he blessed, and the little things that dance in the woodland, and the bright-eyed things that peer through the leaves. All the things in God's world he blessed, and the people were filled with joy and wonder. Yet never again in the corner of the fuller's field grew flowers of any kind, but the field remained barren even as before. Nor came the sea folk into the bay as they had been wont to do, for they went to another part of the sea. The Star Child. To Miss Margaret Tennant, Mrs. Asquith. Once upon a time, two poor woodcutters were making their way home through a great pine forest. It was winter and a night of bitter cold. The snow lay thick about the ground and upon the branches of the trees. The frost kept snapping the little twigs on either side of them as they passed. And when they came to the mountain torrent, she was hanging motionless in the air, for the Ice King had kissed her. So cold was it that even the animals and the birds did not know what to make of it. "Ugh," snarled the wolf as he limped through the brushwood with his tail between his legs. "This is perfectly monstrous weather. Why doesn't the government look to it?" "Weet, weet, weet," twittered the green linnets. "The old earth is dead, and they've laid her out in her white shroud." "The earth is going to be married, and this is her bridal dress," whispered the turtle doves to each other. Their little pink feet were quite frostbitten, but they felt it was their duty to take a romantic view of the situation. "Nonsense," growled the wolf. "I tell you that it is the fault of the government, and if you don't believe me, I shall eat you." The wolf had a thoroughly practical mind and was never at a loss for a good argument. "Well, for my own part," said the woodpecker, who was a born philosopher, "I don't care an atomic theory for explanations. If a thing is so, it is so, and at present it is terribly cold." Terribly cold it certainly was. The little squirrels who lived inside the tall fir tree kept rubbing each other's noses to keep themselves warm, and the rabbits curled themselves up in their holes and did not venture even to look out of the door. The only people who seemed to enjoy it were the great horned owls. Their feathers were quite stiff with rime, and they did not mind, and they rolled their large yellow eyes and called out to each other across the forest, "Twit, twoo, twit, twoo, what delightful weather we're having." On and on went the two woodcutters, blowing lustily into their fingers and stamping with their huge iron-shod boots into the caked snow. Once they sank into a deep drift and came out as white as millers are when the stones are grinding. And once they slipped on the hard smooth ice where the marsh water was frozen, and their faggots fell out of their bundles and they had to pick them up and bind them together again. And once they thought they had lost their way, and a great terror seized on them, for they knew the snow is cruel to those who sleep in her arms. But they put their trust in the good Saint Martin, who watched over all travellers, and retraced their steps and went wearily, and at last they reached the outskirts of the forest, and saw far down in the valley beneath them the lights of the village in which they dwelt. So overjoyed were they at their deliverance that they laughed aloud, and the earth seemed to them like a flower of silver, and the moon like a flower of gold. Yet after they had laughed, they became sad, for they remembered their poverty, and one of them said to the other, "Why did we make merry, seeing that life is for the rich, and not for such as we are? Better that we had died of cold in the forest, or that some wild beast had fallen upon us and slain us." "Truly," answered his companion, Much is given to some, and little is given to others. Injustice has passed out the world, nor is there equal division of aught save of sorrow. But as they bewailed their misery to each other, this strange thing happened. There fell from the sky a very bright and beautiful star. It slipped down the side of the sky, passing by the other stars in its course, and, as they watched it wondering, it seemed to them to sink behind a clump of willow trees that stood hard by a little sheepfold, no more than a stone's throw away. "Why, there's a crock of gold for whoever finds it," they cried, and they set to and ran, so eager were they for the gold. And one of them ran faster than his mate and outstripped him and forced his way through the willows and came out on the other side. And lo, there was indeed a thing of gold lying in the white snow. So he hastened towards it and stooped down, placed his hands upon it, and it was a cloak of golden tissue, curiously wrought with stars and wrapped in many folds. And he cried out to his comrade that he had found the treasure that had fallen from the sky. And when his comrade came up, they sat them down in the snow and loosened the folds of the cloak, that they might divide the pieces of gold. But alas, no gold was in it, no silver, nor indeed treasure of any kind, but only a little child who was asleep. And one of them said to the other, "This is a bitter ending to our hope, nor have we any good fortune, for what doth a child profit to a man? Let us leave it here, and go our way, seeing that we are poor men, and have children of our own, whose bread we may not give to another." But his companion answered him, "Nay, but it were an evil thing to leave the child to perish here in the snow. And though I am as poor as thou art, and have many mouths to feed, and but little in the pot, yet will I bring it home with me, and my wife shall have care of it." So very tenderly he took up the child and wrapped the cloak around it to shield it from the harsh cold, and made his way down the hill to the village. His comrade, marvelling much at his foolishness and softness of heart. And when they came to the village, his comrade said to him, "Thou hast the child, therefore give me the cloak, for it is meet that we should share." But he answered him, "Nay, for the cloak is neither mine nor thine, but the child's only." And he bade him Godspeed and went to his own house and knocked. And when his wife opened the door and saw that her husband had returned safe to her, she put her arms round his neck and kissed him, and took from his back the bundle of faggots and brushed the snow off his shoes and bade him come in. But he said to her, "I have found something in the forest, and I have brought it home to thee to have care of it." And he stirred not from the threshold. "What is it?" she cried. "Show it to me, for the house is bare, and we have need of many things." And he drew the cloak back and showed her the sleeping child. "Alack, good man," she murmured, "have we not children of our own, that thou must need bring a changeling to sit by the hearth? And who knows if it will not bring us bad fortune, and how shall we tend it?" And she was wroth against him. "Nay, but it is a star child," he answered, and he told her the strange manner of the finding of it. But she would not be appeased, but mocked at him and spake angrily, and cried, "Our children lack bread, and shall we feed the child of another? Who is there who careth for us, and who giveth us food?" "Nay, but God careth for the sparrows even, and feedeth them," he answered. "Do not the sparrows die of hunger in the winter?" she asked, "and is it not winter now?" And the man answered nothing, but stirred not from the threshold. And a bitter wind from the forest came in through the open door, and made her tremble, and she shivered, and said to him, "Willst thou not close the door? There cometh a bitter wind into the house, and I am cold." "Into a house where a heart is hard, cometh there not always bitter wind?" he asked. And the woman answered him nothing, but crept closer to the fire. And after a time she turned round and looked at him, and her eyes were full of tears. And he came in swiftly and placed the child in her arms, and she kissed it, and laid it in the little bed where the youngest of their own children was lying. And on the morrow the woodcutter took the curious cloak of gold and placed it in a great chest, and a chain of amber that was round the child's neck his wife took and set it in the chest also. So the star child was brought up with the children of the woodcutter, and sat at the same board with them, and was their playmate. And every year he became more beautiful to look at, so that all those who dwelt in the village were filled with wonder. For while they were swarthy and black-haired, he was white and delicate as sawn ivory. And his curls were like the rings of the daffodil, his lips also were like the petals of a red flower, and his eyes were like violets by a river of pure water, and his body like the narcissus of a field where the mower comes not. Yet did his beauty work him evil, for he grew proud and cruel and selfish. The children of the woodcutter and the other children of the village he despised, saying that they were of mean parentage, while he was noble, being sprang from a star, and he made himself master over them, and called them his servants. No pity had he for the poor, or for those who were blind or maimed or in any way afflicted, but would cast stones at them and drive them forth onto the highway, and bid them beg their bread elsewhere. So that none save the outlaws came twice to that village to ask for alms. Indeed, he was as one enamoured of beauty, and would mock at the weakly and ill-favoured, and made jest of them. And himself he loved, and in summer, when the winds were still, he would lie by the well in the priest's orchard, and look down at the marvel of his own face, and laugh for the pleasure he had in his fairness. Often did the woodcutter and his wife chide him, and say, "We did not deal with thee as thou dealest with those who are left desolate, and have none to succour them. Wherefore art thou so cruel to all those who need pity?" Often did the old preach send for him, and seek to teach him the love of living things, saying to him, "The fly is thy brother, do not harm it. The wild bird that roams through the forest have their freedom, snare them not for thy pleasure. God made the blind worm and the mole, and each has its place. Who art thou to bring pain into God's world? Even the cattle of the field praise him." But the star child heeded not their words, but would frown and flaunt and go back to his companions and lead them. And his companions followed him, for he was fair and fleet of foot, and could dance and pipe and make music. And wherever the star child led them they followed, and whatever the star child bade them do, that they did. And when he pierced with his sharp reed the dim eyes of the mole, they laughed. And when he cast stones at the leper they laughed also. And in all things he ruled them, and they became hard of heart, even as he was. Now there passed one day through the village a poor beggar woman. Her garments were torn and ragged, and her feet were bleeding from the rough road on which she had travelled. And she was in very evil plight. And being weary, she sat her down under a chestnut tree to rest. But when the star child saw her, he said to his companions, "See, there sitteth the foul beggar woman under that fair and green-leaved tree. Come, let us drive her hence, for she is ugly and ill-favoured." So he came near and threw stones at her, and mocked her, and she looked at him with terror in her eyes, nor did she move her gaze from him. And when the woodcutter, who was cleaving leaves in a haggard hard by, saw what the star child was doing, he ran up and rebuked him, and said to him, "Surely thou art hard of heart, and knowest not mercy. For what evil has this poor woman done to thee, that thou shouldst treat her in this wise?" And the star child grew red with anger, and stamped his foot upon the ground, and said, "Who art thou to question me what I do? I am no son of thine to do thy bidding." "Thou speakest truly," answered the woodcutter, "yet did I show thee pity when I found thee in the forest." And when the woman heard these words, she gave a cry out loud, and fell into a swoon, and the woodpecker carried her to his own house, and his wife had care of her. And when she rose up from the swoon into which she had fallen, they set meat and drink before her, and bade her have comfort. But she would neither eat nor drink, but said to the woodcutter, "Didst thou not say that the child was found in the forest? And was it not 10 years from this day?" And the woodcutter answered, "Yea, it was in the forest that I found him, and it is 10 years from this day." "And what signs didst thou find with him?" she cried. "Bare he not upon his neck a chain of amber? Was not round him a cloak of gold tissue broidered with stars?" Truly, answered the woodcutter, it was even as thou sayest. And he took the cloak and amber chain from the chest where they lay and showed them to her. And when she saw them, she wept for joy and said, He is my little son, whom I lost in the forest. I pray thee, send for him quickly, for in search of him I have wandered over the whole world. So the woodcutter and his wife went out and called the star-child and said to him, Go into the house, and there shalt thou find thy mother, who is waiting for thee. So he ran in, filled with wonder and great gladness, but when he saw her, who was waiting there, he laughed scornfully and said, Why, where is my mother? For I see none here but this vile beggar-woman. And the woman answered him, I am thy mother. Thou art mad to say so, cried the star-child angrily. I am no son of thine, for thou art a beggar and ugly and in rags. Therefore get thee hence, and let me see thy foul face no more. Nay, but thou art indeed my little son, whom I bare in the forest, she cried, and she fell on her knees, and held out her arms to him. The robbers stole thee from me, and left thee to die, she murmured. But I recognized thee when I saw thee, and the signs also have I recognized, the cloak of gold tissue and the amber chain. Therefore I pray thee, come with me, for over the whole world I have wandered in search of thee. Come with me, my son, for I have need of thy love. But the star-child stirred not from his place, but shut the doors of his heart against her. Nor was there any sound heard save the sound of the woman weeping for pain. At last he spoke to her, and his voice was hard and bitter. If in very truth thou art my mother, he said, it had been better hadst thou stayed away, and not come here to bring me to shame, seeing that I thought I was a child of some star, and not a beggar-woman's child, as thou tellest me that I am. Therefore get thee hence, and let me see thee no more. Alas, my son, she cried, wilt thou not kiss me before I go? For I have suffered much to find thee. Nay, said the star-child, but thou art too foul to look at, and rather I would kiss the adder or the toad than thee. So the woman rose up and went away into the forest weeping bitterly. And when the star-child saw that she had gone, he was glad and ran back to his playmates that he might play with them. But when they beheld him coming, they mocked him and said, Why, thou art as foul as the toad, and as loathsome as the adder. Get thee hence, for we will not suffer thee to play with us. And they drave him out of the garden. And the star-child frowned and said to himself, What is this that they say to me? I will go to the well of water and look into it, and it shall tell me of my beauty. So he went to the well of water and looked into it, and lo, his face was as the face of a toad, and his body was sealed like an adder. And he flung himself down on the grass and wept, and said to himself, Surely this has come upon me by some reason of my sin, for I have denied my mother and driven her away, and been proud and cruel to her. Wherefore I will go and seek her through the whole world, nor will I rest till I have found her. And there came to him the little daughter of the woodcutter, and she put her hand upon his shoulder and said, What doth it matter if thou hast lost thy comeliness? Stay with us, and I will not mock at thee. And he said to her, Nay, I have been cruel to my mother, and as a punishment has this evil been sent to me. Wherefore I must go hence and wander through the world till I find her, and she give me her forgiveness. So he ran away into the forest and called out to his mother to come to him, but there was no answer. All day long he called to her, and when the sun set he lay down to sleep on a bed of leaves, and the birds and the animals fled from him, for they remembered his cruelty, and he was alone save for the toad that watched him, and the slow adder that crawled past. And in the morning he rose up and plucked some bitter berries from the trees and ate them, and took his way through the great wood, weeping sorely. And of everything that he met he made inquiry if perchance they had seen his mother. He said to the mole, Thou canst go beneath the earth. Tell me, is my mother there? And the mole answered, Thou hast blinded mine eyes. How should I know? He said to the linnet, Thou canst fly over the top of the tall trees, and canst see the whole world. Tell me, canst thou see my mother? And the linnet answered, Thou hast clipped my wings for thy pleasure. How should I fly? And to the little squirrel who lived in the fir tree and was lonely, he said, Where is my mother? And the squirrel answered, Thou hast slain mine. Dost thou seek to slay thine also? And the star-child wept and bowed his head and prayed forgiveness of God's things, and went through the forest seeking for the beggar woman. And on the third day he came to the other side of the forest and went down into the plain. And when he passed through the villages, the children mocked him and threw stones at him. And the carlots would not suffer him even to sleep in the byres, lest he might bring mildew on the stored corn. So foul was he to look at, and their hired men drave him away. And there was none who had pity on him, nor could he hear anywhere of the beggar woman who was his mother, though for the space of 3 years he wandered over the world and often seemed to see her on the road in front of him. And he would call to her and run after her till the sharp flints made his feet to bleed, but overtake her he could not. And those who dwelt by the way did ever deny that they had seen her, or any like of her, and they made sport of his sorrow. For the space of 3 years he wandered over the world, and in the world there was neither love, nor loving kindness, nor charity for him. But it was even such a world as he had made for himself in the days of his great pride. And one evening he came to the gate of a strong-walled city that stood by a river. And weary and footsore though he was, he made to enter in. But the soldiers who stood on guard dropped their halberts across the entrance and said roughly to him, What is thy business in the city? I am seeking for my mother, he answered, and I pray ye to suffer me to pass, for it may be that she is in this city. But they mocked at him, and one of them wagged a black beard and set down his shield and cried, Of a truth, thy mother will not be merry when she sees thee. For thou art more ill-favoured than the toad of the marsh or the adder that crawls in the fen. Get thee gone, get thee gone. Thy mother dwells not in this city. And another, who held a yellow banner in his hand, said to him, Who is thy mother, and wherefore art thou seeking for her? And he answered, My mother is a beggar even as I am, and I have treated her evilly, and I pray ye to suffer me to pass, that she may give me her forgiveness, if it be that she tarrieth in this city. But they would not, and pricked him with their spears. And as he turned away weeping, one whose armour was inlaid with gilt flowers, and on whose helmet couched a lion that had wings, came up and made inquiries of the soldiers who it was had sorted entry. And they said to him, It was a beggar, and the child of a beggar, and we have driven him away. Nay, he cried, laughing, But we will sell the foul thing for a slave, and his price shall be the price of a bowl of sweet wine. And an old and evil-visaged man who was passing by called out and said, I will buy him for that price. And when he had paid the price, he took the star-child by the hand and led him into the city. And after that they had gone through many streets, they came to a little door that was set in a wall, that was covered with a pomegranate tree. And the old man touched the door with a ring of graved jasper, and it opened, and they went down 5 steps of brass, into a garden filled with black poppies and green jars of burnt clay. And the old man then took from his turban a scarf of figured silk, and bound with it the eyes of the star-child, and drave him in front of him. And when the scarf was taken off his eyes, the star-child found himself in a dungeon that was lit by a lantern of horn. And the old man set before him some mouldy bread on a trencher, and said, Eat, and some brackish water in a cup, and said, Drink. And when he had eaten and drunk, the old man went out, locking the door behind him and fastening it with an iron chain. And on the morrow, the old man, who was indeed the subtlest of the magicians of Libya, had learnt his art from one who dwelt in the tombs of the Nile, came in to him and frowned at him and said, In a wood that is nigh to the gate of this city of Giara, there are 3 pieces of gold. One is of white gold, and another is of yellow gold, and the gold of the third is red. Today thou shalt bring me the piece of white gold, and if thou bringest it not back, I will beat thee with 100 stripes. Get thee away quickly, and at sunset I will be waiting for thee at the door of the garden. See that thou bringest the white gold, or it shall be ill for thee, for thou art my slave, and I have brought thee for the price of a bowl of sweet wine." And he bound the eyes of the star-child with a scarf of figured silk, and led him through the house, and through the garden of poppies, and up the 5 steps of brass, and having opened the little door with his ring, he set him into the street. And the star-child went out of the gate of the city, and came to the wood of which the magician had spoken to him. Now this wood was very fair to look at from without, and seemed full of singing birds and sweet-scented flowers, and the star-child entered it gladly. Yet did its beauty profit him little, for wherever he went harsh briars and thorns shot up from the ground and encompassed him, and evil nettles stung him, and the thistle pierced him with her daggers, so that he was in sore distress, nor could he anywhere find the piece of white gold of which the magician had spoken, though he had sought for it from morn till noon, and from noon till sunset. And at sunset he set his face towards home, weeping bitterly, for he knew what fate was in store for him. But when he reached the outskirts of the wood, he heard from a thicket a cry of someone in pain, and forgetting his own sorrow, he ran back into the place, and saw there a little hare caught in a trap that some hunter had set for it. And the star-child had pity on it, and released it, and said to it, "I am myself but a slave, yet may I give thee thy freedom." And the hare answered him and said, "Surely thou hast given me freedom, and what shall I give thee in return?" And the star-child said to it, "I am seeking for a piece of white gold, nor can I anywhere find it, and if I bring it not to my master he will beat me." "Come now with me," said the hare, "I will lead thee to it, for I know where it is hidden, and for what purpose." So the star-child went with the hare, and lo, in the cleft of a great oak tree he saw the piece of white gold that he was seeking. And he was filled with joy, and seized it, and said to the hare, "The service that I did thee thou hast rendered back again many times over, and the kindness that I showed thee thou hast repaid 100-fold." "Nay," answered the hare, "but as thou dealt with me, so I did deal with thee." And it ran away swiftly, and the star-child went towards the city. Now at the gate of the city there was seated one who was a leper. Over his face hung a cowl of grey linen, and through the eyelets his eyes gleamed like red coals. And when he saw the star-child coming, he struck upon his wooden bowl and clattered his bell, and called out to him, and said, "Give me a piece of money, or I must die of hunger. For they have thrust me out of the city, and there is no one who has pity on me." "Alas," cried the star-child, "I have but one piece of money in my wallet, and if I bring it not to my master he will beat me, for I am his slave." But the leper entreated him and prayed of him till the star-child had pity, and gave him the piece of white gold. And when he came to the magician's house, the magician opened to him, and brought him in, and said to him, "Hast thou the piece of white gold?" And the star-child answered, "I have it not." So the magician fell upon him and beat him, and set before him an empty trencher, and said, "Eat," and an empty cup, and said, "Drink," and flung him again into the dungeon. And on the morrow the magician came to him, and said, "If today thou bringest me not the piece of yellow gold, I will surely keep thee as my slave, and give thee 300 stripes." So the star-child went to the wood, and all day long he searched for the piece of yellow gold, but nowhere could he find it. And at sunset he sat down and began to weep. And as he was weeping, there came to him the little hare that he had rescued from the trap. And the hare said to him, "Why art thou weeping, and what dost thou seek in the woods?" And the star-child answered, "I am seeking for a piece of yellow gold that is hidden here. And if I find it not, my master will beat me and keep me as a slave." "Follow me," cried the hare, and it ran through the wood till it came to a pool of water. And at the bottom of the pool the piece of yellow gold was lying. "How shall I thank thee," said the star-child, "for this is the second time that you have succoured me." "Nay, but thou hast pity on me first," said the hare, and it ran away swiftly. The star child took the piece of yellow gold and put it in his wallet, and hurried to the city. But the leper saw him coming and ran to meet him, and knelt down and cried, "Give me a piece of money, or I shall die of hunger." And the star child said to him, "I have in my wallet but one piece of yellow gold, and if I bring it not to my master, he will beat me and keep me as a slave." But the leper entreated him sore, so that the star child had pity on him and gave him the piece of yellow gold. And when he came to the magician's house, the magician opened to him and brought him in and said to him, "Hast thou the piece of yellow gold?" And the star child said to him, "I have not." So the magician fell upon him and beat him and loaded him with chains and cast him again into the dungeon. And on the morrow the magician came to him and said, "If today thou bringest me the piece of red gold, I will set thee free. But if thou bringest it not, I will surely slay thee." So the star child went to the wood, and all day long he searched for the piece of red gold. But nowhere could he find it, and at evening he sat down and wept. And as he was weeping, there came to him the little hare. And the hare said to him, "The piece of red gold that thou seekest is in the cavern that is behind thee. Therefore weep no more, but be glad." "How shall I reward thee?" cried the star child, "for lo, this is the third time that thou hast succoured me." "Nay, but thou hast pity on me first," said the hare, and it ran away swiftly. And the star child entered the cavern, and in its farthest corner he found the piece of red gold. So he put it in his wallet and hurried to the city. And the leper, seeing him coming, stood in the centre of the road and cried out and said to him, "Give me the piece of red gold, or I must die." And the star child had pity on him again and gave him the piece of red gold, saying, "Thy need is greater than mine." Yet was his heart heavy, for he knew what evil fate awaited him. But lo, as he passed through the gates of the city, the guards bowed down and made obedience to him, saying, "How beautiful is our Lord!" And a crowd of citizens followed him and cried out, "Surely there is none so beautiful in the whole world." So that the star child wept and said to himself, "They are mocking me and making light of my misery." And so large was the concourse of the people that he lost the thread of his way, and found himself at last in the great square, in which there was a palace of a king. And the gate of the palace opened, and the priests and the high officers of the city ran forth to meet him, and they abased themselves before him, and said, "Thou art our Lord, for whom we have been waiting, and the son of our king." And the star child answered them and said, "I am no king's son, but the child of a poor beggar woman. And how say ye that I am beautiful, for I know that I am evil to look at?" Then he, whose armour was inlaid with gilt flowers, and on whose helmet crouched a lion that had wings, held up a shield and cried, "How saith my Lord that he is not beautiful?" And the star child looked, and lo, his face was even as it had been, and his comeliness had come back to him. And he saw that in his eyes, which he had not seen there before. And the priests and the high officers knelt down and said to him, "It was prophesied of old that on this day should come he who was to rule over us. Therefore let our Lord take this crown and this sceptre, and be in his justice and mercy our king over us." But he said to them, "I am not worthy, for I have denied the mother who bare me. Nor may I rest till I have found her, and know her forgiveness. Therefore let me go, for I must wander again over the world, and may not tarry here. Though ye bring me the crown and the sceptre." As he spake, he turned his head from them towards the street that led to the gate of the city. And lo, among the crowd that pressed round the soldiers, he saw the beggar woman, who was his mother, and at her side stood the leper, who had sat by the road. And a cry of joy broke from his lips, and he ran over, and kneeled down, and kissed the wounds of his mother's feet, and wet them with his tears. He bowed his head in the dust, and sobbed, as one whose heart might break, and said to her, "Mother, I denied thee in the hour of my pride. Accept me in the hour of my humility. Mother, I gave thee hate. Do thou give me love. Mother, I rejected thee. Receive thy child now." But the beggar woman answered him not a word. And he reached out his hands and clasped the white feet of the leper, and said to him, Thrice did I give thee of my mercy. Bid my mother speak to me once. But the leper answered him not a word. And he sobbed again and said, Mother, my suffering is greater than I can bear. Give me thy forgiveness, and let me go back to the forest. And the beggar woman put a hand on his head and said to him, Rise. And the leper put his hand on his head and said to him, Rise also. And he rose up from his feet and looked at them, and lo, they were a king and a queen. And the queen said to him, This is thy father, who thou hast succoured. And the king said, This is thy mother, whose feet thou hast washed with thy tears. And they fell on his neck and kissed him, and brought him into the palace, and clothed him in fair raiment, and set the crown upon his head, and the sceptre in his hand. And over the city that stood by the river he ruled, and was its lord. Much justice and mercy did he show to all. And the evil magician he banished, and to the woodcutter and his wife he sent many rich gifts, and to their children he gave high honour. Nor would he suffer any one to be cruel to bird or beast, but taught love and loving kindness and charity, and to the poor he gave bread, and to the naked he gave raiment. And there was peace and plenty in the land. Yet ruled he not long, so great had been his suffering, and so bitter the fire of his testing, for after the space of 3 years he died. And he who came after him ruled evilly.